So imagine for a second that you own a fortress.
Right.
You've spent millions on, I don't know, the thickest walls, heavy steel doors, the most advanced alarm systems money can buy.
Right, the absolute best security.
Exactly. And you lock everything up tight every single night. But then to actually live your life and run your business, you have to hand out copies of your front door key.
And not just to one or two trusted friends.
Right. You're handing them out to like 1,000 different strangers. I mean, the plumber, the mail carrier, the company that waters your plants, the people who manage your finances. You are perfectly secure inside your walls. But your safety now entirely depends on whether 1,000 other people are being just as careful with their copy of your key.
It is a terrifying mental image, honestly,
Yeah.
but it captures the reality of modern business operations perfectly. We spend so much time looking inward at our own security, but the perimeter has completely dissolved.
Yeah, the perimeter is just gone.
Exactly. That's why the days of treating vendor risk as a quiet, back office compliance chore are completely over. It is now a boardroom crisis.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive for you today. We are decoding a massive 2026 white paper on third-party risk monitoring. We've got the paper itself, plus a massive stack of current breach data, new global regulations, and critical analyst guidance.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It really is. But our mission is to figure out why the biggest threat to your business isn't inside your own walls anymore. It's living inside the hundreds or thousands of outside vendors you depend on. So let's start with the sheer scale of the problem. If I'm running a large organization today, how many of these outside vendors am I actually relying on?
Well, the white paper points out that the average large organization relies on thousands of third parties. Thousands. And the scale of compromise within that group is just staggering.
It's massive, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a widely cited study from 2023 showing that about 98% of organizations were connected to at least one third party that had been reached.
Wait, 98%. So basically, if you're doing business today, it's a near certainty that you're connected to a compromised vendor.
It is a statistical certainty. Industry analyses consistently estimate that roughly 30% of all breaches trace back to a third party.
Wow, almost a third.
Yeah, and when your dependency scales to that level, the odds that at least one of your vendors is having a very bad day at any given moment, well, they stop being small. It just becomes a daily operational reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because historically, the way companies checked on these vendors was like sending them a massive questionnaire once a year.
Right. The classic annual spreadsheet.
Exactly. But looking at the research from IBM we have in our sources, there seems to be a massive disconnect in the timing here. I mean, intrusions today happen in seconds, but it takes an average of well over 200 days just to identify and contain a breach.
Oh, absolutely. The speed of the threat has completely outpaced the old rhythm of defense.
Right. So if we rely on a once-a-year questionnaire, isn't that like taking a single photograph of your house in January to prove to your insurance company that it's safe from burglars all year round?
That is a brilliant way to put it.
I mean, you're leaving that vendor essentially unwatched for 364 days. A snapshot tells me nothing about what happened in March or August.
That house photograph analogy is incredibly apt. And what's fascinating here is that the market consensus has finally caught up to that realization.
Which is good news.
It is. That's why continuous monitoring is no longer seen as a luxury upgrade. It is the baseline. But we have to be precise about what continuous actually means here.
Right, because it does not mean sending that same giant spreadsheet every week.
Yeah.
Nobody has the time for that.
Exactly. Nobody could manage that.
So how does continuous monitoring actually work in practice? What are these systems looking at if they aren't just, asking the vendor questions?
They are looking for behavioral shifts and digital exhaust. Modern continuous monitoring platforms ingest data from literally thousands of feeds.
Like what kind of feeds?
Well, they scan the dark web for mentioned credentials, they track the uptime of a vendor's servers, and they even monitor legal filings and financial news for signs of distress. It's about building a system that surfaces risk signals as they happen.
Okay, so it's actively watching for changes in the environment. Where do those original point-in-time questionnaires fit in then? Like, should we just throw them out entirely?
No, not at all. Point-in-time questionnaires still have a crucial place. You need them to set the initial baseline of what good actually looks like for a specific vendor.
So they set the ground rules.
Yes.
Right.
Like, what are their stated policies? What compliance frameworks do they claim to follow? The smart framing isn't that continuous monitoring replaces the point-in-time check. It's that the periodic assessment sets the standard, and continuous monitoring tells you the exact moment the vendor stops meeting that standard.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And that actually brings us to one of the most hotly debated topics in our source material. Because when we talk about continuous monitoring, this massive industry has sprung up around these outside-in security ratings.
Oh, yes. The security score industry.
Yeah, they essentially scan a company's internet-facing footprint and spit out a letter grade or a number, right?
They do. And it is arguably the most contested practice in this entire field.
I can see why. I was looking at the marketing claims from some of these score vendors, and they are wildly confident. One leading provider claims that a company they grade with an F is roughly 13.8 times more likely to suffer a breach than a company they grade with an A.
Which sounds like an incredible metric.
It sounds like magic.
Yeah.
But are these scores basically just the cybersecurity version of a consumer credit score? Because if the companies selling the scores are the exact same ones publishing these 13.8 times statistics, shouldn't we be treating this like a vendor pitch rather than, objective truth?
Many seasoned security professionals raise that exact critique. The main argument is that correlation is not a verdict. A grade might be statistically associated with breach likelihood when you look across tens of thousands of companies, but it can still be a terrible predictor for the one specific vendor you are evaluating right in front of you.
It's only looking at the outside of the house, right? You can see if the paint is peeling or if a window is cracked, but you can't see if the alarm system is actually turned on inside.
Exactly.
So what is the actual mechanism here? What are these external scanners actually seeing?
Well, they're scanning public-facing digital assets. They look for things like expired security certificates, open ports on a server that shouldn't be exposed to the public internet, or outdated software versions running on a website.
Okay, so technical flaws.
Yeah, and it's valuable intelligence.
Yeah.
But an outside-in scan completely misses internal controls. It misses the company culture. It completely misses the specific contractual obligations between you and that vendor.
So a perfectly clean external scan could be hiding a totally chaotic internal environment.
Oh, it happens constantly. Yeah. And just as importantly, it sees almost nothing regarding the financial health or operational resilience of the company.
Right, so we shouldn't just blindly rely on these scores to make our decisions, but we also shouldn't throw them in the trash, right? What is the right way for you, the listener, to actually use this kind of data?
The mature approach is to treat these scores as a highly useful early warning and triage layer. They're fantastic for spotting whose posture just degraded this week.
Like if a vendor suddenly drops from an A to a C.
Exactly. Then you know who deserves a closer look. But they are a terrible basis for a definitive go or no-go decision. A number on a dashboard invites false confidence. You cannot treat a score as absolute truth and use it as an excuse to just switch off human judgment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if we aren't just looking at hackers trying to pick the lock, and if external cyber scores don't tell the whole story, what else are we looking for? I mean, surely the biggest, most well-funded tech vendors have this under control, right?
You would think so, yes. But the white paper highlights a massive blind spot here, which is operational risk. Some of the most catastrophic recent events struck through completely non-cyber channels.
Right, like they weren't even hacked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Look at the AWS East 1 outage back in 2025. That wasn't a Russian hacker. That was a race condition in their own automated DNS management.
Hold on, a race condition. I know we have technical listeners, but for those of us who aren't engineers, what does that actually mean for the companies relying on them?
Think of it like two automated trains trying to switch onto the exact same track at the exact same millisecond. They collided, the system panicked, and it created this massive cascading logic error.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it took down over 140 different AWS services globally for roughly 15 hours.
And no cybersecurity score in the world is going to catch that. Because it's not a security flaw, it's a structural one. They'd still have an A rating the very moment the servers crashed.
That is the pivotal realization here. And the sources also point to the July 2024 CrowdStrike catastrophe.
Oh, I remember that.
Right. A faulty routine software update crashed an estimated 8.5 million Windows machines globally. It grounded flights, halted hospitals, took down broadcasters. It caused an estimated $10 billion in damages.
$10 billion. Unbelievable.
And both CrowdStrike and AWS are highly regarded tech titans doing everything right from a cyber perspective.
Doesn't this completely reframe what third-party risk actually is then? I mean, a perfectly secure vendor can still be the source of your absolute worst day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces a total reframing. Third-party risk is now fundamentally about operational resilience and concentration risk.
Concentration risk, meaning putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. A compliance-focused, cyber-only program will miss a global outage or a faulty software release entirely because those events strike even fully compliant vendors.
So if I am building a modern monitoring program, what am I supposed to watch to catch these kinds of disasters?
You have to look at upstream dependencies. For instance, what happens if your payroll vendor, your CRM vendor, and your email provider all rely on the exact same cloud region, and that region goes down?
Then you are totally locked out.
Right. You also need to watch financial signals like credit shifts or going concern warnings. A vendor can have flawless cyber hygiene, but if they are one financial shock away from bankruptcy or one bad software update away from bricking your endpoints, your operations are still going to halt.
Which brings us perfectly to the regulators, because they are clearly watching these massive outages happen, and they're changing the rules. The white paper calls this a quiet revolution. Regulators are now holding the buyer accountable for a vendor's failure, regardless of what the contract says.
This is a huge shift. Historically, if a vendor went down, a company could just point to the contract and say, hey, it was their fault, their servers failed.
Blame the vendor.
Right. But regulators are no longer accepting that defense. They increasingly judge a failure by its impact on customers and markets, not by who technically owned the server. Accountability follows the function.
The sources go really deep into DORA, the EU Digital Operational Resilience Act, and the underlying structural reason for DORA is wild. Over 60% of European financial critical functions depend on third-party technology providers. The banks don't even own the infrastructure they run on.
Which translates into incredibly strict, concrete duties under DORA. Financial firms must maintain a continuously updated register of information detailing every single tech vendor arrangement.
Every single one.
Every single one. And when the first submissions were due in early 2026, supervisors immediately started cross-checking them, and they found hidden sub-outsourcing chains that firms claimed didn't exist.
Wait, sub-outsourcing chains, meaning the vendor farmed the work out to another vendor who farmed it out to someone else, and the bank had absolutely no idea.
That is exactly the issue. Furthermore, regulators under DORA can now designate the most systemically important vendors as critical third-party providers, or CTPPs.
And oversee them directly.
Yes. We are talking about the massive players like AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. But crucially, even if the regulator is watching your critical vendor, it does not absolve you of your own duty to monitor them and have a tested exit plan.
And it's not just Europe. The U.S. banking regulators are demanding you own the outcome no matter the contractual distance. So obviously, companies are scrambling to adapt. They're going out and buying shiny new continuous monitoring platforms.
Of course they are.
But I have to push back on this tech-centric solution. If I go out and buy $1 million dashboard that tracks dark web chatter and server uptimes, but I don't change who actually responds to the alerts it generates, aren't I just installing a hypersensitive fire alarm in a building that has no fire department? I'm just paying for alert fatigue.
That is a great analogy. Tooling is, at best, perhaps 1/5 of the actual work. The other 4/5 is the operating model.
The operating model.
Right. And the operating model is where these monitoring programs ultimately live or die.
Break that down for us. What does a functioning operating model actually look like in practice?
Mature programs use a 3-lines model. The first line is the business unit that actually uses the vendor because they own the risk day to day. The second line is the risk or vendor management function that sets the policy and runs the monitoring.
Okay, and the third?
The third line is internal audit, checking that the entire system actually works. Most failures happen because of a fuzzy first line. An alert fires on that shiny dashboard, and it just sits there because no one clearly owns the response.
So you need clear ownership, but you also need to know what to care about. Because if my dashboard alerts me every single time a vendor changes a minor setting on their website, I'm going to start ignoring it by day 2.
Exactly. You must define materiality thresholds. What counts as a material change for a critical vendor versus a low-risk vendor? You need playbooks that convert a signal into steps like investigate, escalate, or accept. But even with all of that, there is one final crucial piece of the operating model.
Let me guess. Contractual hooks.
Yes, contractual hooks.
The right to actually do something about the alert.
Detection is completely useless without the right to act. If your continuous monitoring detects a massive vulnerability at a vendor, but your contract doesn't include the right to audit them or define remediation timelines or flow down obligations to their subcontractors, you are powerless.
Wow.
Monitoring without contractual teeth just gives you a clearly detected problem that you legally cannot force the vendor to fix.
Okay, so let's say you build this operating model. You have your 3 lines of defense, your threshold, your ironclad contracts. How do you actually know if the whole program is working? Our sources draw a very sharp line between KPIs, key performance indicators, and KRIs, key risk indicators.
This distinction is what separates the mature programs from the illusion of management. A KPI tells you about activity. A KRI warns you of developing exposure before a problem hits.
So what does this all mean? My main metric is just a KPI, like what percentage of annual questionnaires did we send out on time. I am basically grading myself on effort, not results.
Exactly.
That is exactly like bragging about how many gym memberships you bought this year, without ever once stepping on a scale to see if you actually lost weight.
Spot on. A KPI only changes after the fact. It measures if you ran the process. A key risk indicator, a KRI, measures the actual risk. A great KRI example from the white paper is mean time to action, or MTTA.
Mean time to action.
Yes. How quickly does your team actually do something after a severe risk trigger fires? If your MTTA is rising, your team is overwhelmed, and your risk exposure is growing, regardless of how many questionnaires you send out.
That makes total sense.
Another vital KRI is concentration share, monitoring what percentage of your critical functions rely on a single provider.
And the sources are pretty brutal about companies that are still faking this. Survey data from 2026 shows organizations still running these programs on manual spreadsheets are way more likely to get hit with regulatory examiner findings.
Because the spreadsheet can only ever report history. It can never show you current active exposure.
Right.
Running a program that way, or chasing the appearance of diligence by just collecting unread questionnaires, is what the industry analysts call monitoring as theater. It is a massive liability.
Monitoring as theater. I love that term. And if spreadsheets are a liability for the risks we already understand, how on earth are we going to handle the new frontiers? Because the white paper ends by looking at the bleeding edge of third-party risk, and it is honestly unsettling. Vendors are aggressively embedding increasingly autonomous agentic AI into the products we buy, often without clearly disclosing it.
And the anxiety around this is highly measurable. A 2026 survey noted in the white paper found that absolutely 0 organizations felt highly confident in their ability to manage the AI risk living inside their vendors.
0. Nobody feels good about it.
Nobody. It raises massive questions about what training data is being used with your information, the scope of unsupervised actions these agents can take, and who is accountable when the AI makes a catastrophic error.
Which brings us right back to the idea of those sub-outsourcing chains we talked about earlier. The risk doesn't just stop at your direct vendor. If an AI agent negotiates a micro-contract with an unvetted data broker in a matter of milliseconds, you have suddenly got a completely invisible vendor in your ecosystem.
This raises an important question. It forces us to confront nth-party risks, the risk inherited from your vendor's vendor, the extended supply chain. Most teams today still cannot see clearly past their first tier of direct vendors, let alone monitor an AI agent making autonomous decisions 3 layers deep.
This has been an incredible journey through the realities of the modern supply chain. To sum up the overarching theme from all these sources for you, the entire industry is undergoing a massive paradigm shift. We are moving away from the old question, which was simply, can you document that you assessed the vendor? The new question, the one regulators and boards are asking, is can you detect and act on a material change in a vendor before it becomes your incident?
And closing that gap between the illusion of a paper assessment and the reality of continuous actionable detection is what defines real risk monitoring today. But there is one more layer to this that we haven't touched on yet, and it is something you, as the listener, should seriously consider as you map out your extended ecosystem over the next 5 years.
What's that?
Geopolitical balkanization.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about corporate failure, vendors crashing, AI making mistakes, financial ruin. But what happens when the infrastructure itself is physically and legally severed?
You mean like nations cutting each other off?
Exactly. As global tensions rise, we are seeing the very real threat of a splinter net, where data localization laws and national firewalls force companies to completely duplicate and separate their vendor supply chains by region.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It's a nightmare. If your perfectly secure, financially healthy cloud provider is suddenly banned from operating in a specific country by a sovereign decree overnight, well, no amount of traditional continuous monitoring is going to save your operations. The next great shock won't just be about whether your vendor's software works, but whether it is legally allowed to exist in the same time zone as your data.
It really makes you rethink that house with 1,000 strangers holding your keys, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It is definitely time to take a very hard look at your own extended ecosystems because the perimeter is completely gone and the risks are moving faster than ever. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.